The topic around psychological safety, I mean, I wanted to acknowledge that it's a really tricky space to kind of step into. One of the reasons being is that it's actually deeply personal. I mean, if you think about the two words, psychology, the actual psyche of the individual, and the idea of safety and what that means to people, is quite a personal experience. So kind of a blanket response to what is psychological safety in teams or across organizational systems is quite difficult. The other one is it's often misunderstood. I think it's often used as an excuse, a kind of thing that stops rather than enables, and kind of gets a little bit blurred around the edges. And we don't have a definition around what that means for us in different organizations. The other thing is that it's tricky because if we don't feel safe, and especially if we don't feel safe from a psychological perspective, what starts to happen is we have a neurological response, which is almost as intense as pain. It's like someone has punched you in the gut. So we have to start to understand this in a holistic way. The other thing is that it's linked to our biographies. So one of the things we know is that we've all had different experiences across our own life that will determine how we will sit within spaces that feel quite heated, or feel quite confronting, or feel like they are on the edge. And each one of us will have an experience that we bring in with us. We can't leave those behind. So understanding that is really important. The flip side to that is that what we do understand is that if there is psychological safety, it really does enhance performance. There is a kind of sense of finding a sweet spot, an ability or a capacity to kind of slide in, to do our best work, to utilize our wisdom, to engage, to not be afraid to say, I don't know, or to ask any questions. So there is no doubt that it is essential. I mean, a lot of the work around this, I mean, the two most, I guess, profound studies, if we're going to kind of throw in different thinkings around it, was the Google study, the Aristotle project, which was in 2016, I think, where Google, because Google can, decided to do a massive, I think it was over a 2-year, 3-year research program around what makes they called the perfect team. And they looked at different variables around diversity, skills, talents, what brought people together, how they operate together, and there was no pattern. They couldn't actually identify a pattern. Simultaneously, they started to read and kind of get interested in the work of Amy Edmondson, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work. So Amy Edmondson is an organizational behavioral scientist. She's a Harvard professor, and she has pretty much cornered the market at this stage around psychological safety. So both of those articles I can send to you, because one of the articles that was the Google article was written by Duhigg. What's his name again? I wrote it down, so give me a moment. Okay, what's his name? Charles Duhigg, who's written the book around habits and actually how we start to change our habits. So I'll send those two to you. But they were fundamental because both of them found that those teams that made more mistakes, those teams that were able to actually fail more, were most successful. Where there were spaces where people were able to take risks, and that had been established as an environment for risk taking, which actually kind of equates with the whole idea of psychological safety. That they were prepared to take more risks, landed up being more successful. So that seemed to be the thread that was running through it. So hold that in mind, because one of the things that I've been exploring, certainly with clients that I have and with colleagues that I work with, is that we sometimes conflate the idea of safety with comfort. You know, we kind of say comfort or security. That it's if we're feeling uncomfortable, we feel unsafe. And actually or insecure, we feel unsafe. And that, as we know, has been made even more evident and amplified 1,000 times through this last year and COVID, where our jobs are on the line, panicked busyness. We don't want to be exposed. We want to be seen as being relevant. So we kind of get on this sort of treadmill, but yet this kind of sense of trying to keep people secure and comfortable is not the same as psychological safety. And from a leadership perspective, we've got to be able to differentiate between the two, because if we don't, we get into this kind of probably unhealthy pattern of over-caring, over-protecting, and not holding people to account. So it's an interesting one that we have to explore. So what I wanted to talk about tonight was really about the missed opportunities that we often get when we, or the missed opportunities for creativity, innovation, and learning, when we don't have what we're starting to call psychological safety. There are multiple, or when we think we need more psychological safety than we're offering up. So they missed opportunities for learning. So I guess one of the things is that this is around safe enough. And I think it's really important. I wish it was called psychologically safe enough, because it's going to depend on how you enter into this, how you see yourself as a member of a team, whether you've had longevity in a team, whether you've had history in the team, whether you have a relationship with people that goes beyond your team, you know somebody else of it. So safe enough would be different for different people. And actually our work is to be able to do a kind of diagnostic around what individuals, unique requirements of individuals in a team might look like in order for us to have a sense of it being psychologically safe. So one of the things that I kind of have focused in on when I think about psychological safety is it is for the purposes of learning. Because again, if we remember that kind of during COVID times, people are insecure, feeling slightly out of their depth, less safe in the certainty of it. I'm kind of stepping away from that, and for the purpose of this argument is really just keep it in the space of the safety in order for us to be able to learn. And let's be honest, learning for adults is pretty damn tough. We say we want to learn, and actually we are, not us, but many are very curious around what it is that they could learn. But if you think about learning as a process, what you're asking people to do is step onto their edge of incompetence, to a space where they don't know. Now, when we're talking about experts, when we're talking about people who have lived experiences or knowledge base or have been educated and work in organizations like yours, very few amongst us want to sit on that edge. We don't want to sort of stare into this abyss. It's pretty damn uncomfortable. It doesn't feel kind of cool. And actually, we start to lose a sense of our, well, I'm making a generalized statement, the possibility of losing a sense of our own identity and value in the world. It's like, it's pretty nerve-wracking. So we've got to actually hold that in mind when we're thinking about establishing environments that we're calling, that we're naming as psychologically safe. But I actually think it is about creating learning environments. What does it mean to prepare a space that people can disagree, can speak up, can have conflict and stay in relationship, where it doesn't become personal, where there is a kind of, we don't even use the words like courage and bravery, because actually even saying the courage to speak up has a connotation that this is not a safe environment. So one of the things that have become, again, very apparent for me in my consulting work and coming off a piece of work I did yesterday is that words matter. The way we describe the context, the way we describe the environment, the way we describe or use words or metaphors about our team and where we're at and what we want to change and how we're going to change it will determine the behaviors of people. And I'm not sure that we think too deliberately around the language. So the courage, have the courage to speak up, you know, is already putting people on their back foot. So just kind of holding that one in mind. So if we think about how people have defined psychological safety, so Amy Edmondson's work, she talks about a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. It's a pretty nice definition, a shared belief. So there's something about that. I believe that there is something between us, the interpersonal risk. I can take a risk because a little bit like Lencioni's trust, you think about the idea around trust, actually, it's about having your back. It's about being there and being available, that I can hear you at your most vulnerable and not be judgmental and not hold that against you. So I think there is a nice link between the work that Amy Edmondson's done around this and the work of Lencioni and the functionality of teams. But, the whole thing around safety, it's interesting because if I said to you, what is the opposite of safety? And I did do this test with a group yesterday. So if we're talking about the opposite of safety, what comes up? And most people leaned into the idea of danger. If it's not safe, it must be dangerous. That became the opposite. And I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine. Are organizations dangerous? The opposite of danger, or the opposite of not being safe, is acceptance. And I kind of went, that's really interesting. It's quite surprising. And then we kind of started to unpack that in terms of this domain of, this idea around psychological safety. And we looked at it on multiple levels. Can we accept difference and diversity? Can I accept that you come from a different country with a different culture and value that in some way and make you feel valued in terms of the wisdom and what you're bringing into it? Can I accept that you might have a very different opinion to me or a different idea around how we need to progress on a particular project, and not see it as providing some further learning as opposed to a judgment? Because as human beings, we're very, very quick to judge. That's where we go to first off. So one of it was around diversity. The other one was, can I accept the fact that the ways that you learn and the pace at which you learn could be very different to mine? So one of the things that I've noticed that kind of make people feel less trusting to be able to speak up is when people assume a position of, it's so bloody obvious, how come you can't see it? It's so obvious. I mean, can you not see that if we do, and actually people can't see it? Can we be accepting of the fact that the way that we see the world might be different, the way that we need to learn might be different? The other one around acceptance was around personality and preference. And that, can I accept that what makes me feel anxious may make you feel joyous? What makes me feel curious may make you feel frustrated. So how do we take into account that there will be this difference and acceptance of what this might look like? The other one is around the human condition. Can I accept that at the end of the day, when we're coming into a team environment, whether it's to do a big change effort, it's less about the maps, the templates, the kind of technical side of it. At the end of the day, it's about the human condition. And actually, we have to create environments where we take that into consideration. And the other one where we kind of, as my Yiddish grandmother would say, the unterste Schure is that nobody holds monopoly on the truth. So if we're going to actually create, it's a wonderful place to step into the idea of psychological safety with a mindset that says there is none amongst us that has monopoly on the truth. So how do we actually hold that in some ways, in a way that is light and generative and generous? So I actually think psychologically safe environments are generous more than trusting. They kind of give us a space to give freely and not hold back, which is quite a different idea. So I really kind of love that idea of acceptance as underpinning the idea the notion of psychological safety, because where it led me to, and I mean, again, once we open this up in terms of conversation, I'm curious where you sit, is actually we can't create psychologically safe environments if we haven't done our own work. If we haven't spent a little bit of time understanding our own triggers or our own hooks or what might kind of derail us. So given that we all bring in biographies, and I'm talking to us as holding more leadership roles or facilitator or consultant roles, we need to kind of spend a little bit more time going, so what happens to me when I go into an environment and someone disagrees with me? Or what happens to me around certain subjects or topics? And I don't know if we spend enough time in that preparedness around going, how do I get more conscious of what power I have? Like the example around a boss coming in and saying, speak up, it's psychological safe. There is a complete lack of awareness on their part often that they have so much power. And actually, I'm sitting there going, well, okay, you're saying this, but what's coming out of your mouth doesn't seem to relate to the way you're even standing over me. So your body language is even saying something else. So the mixed messaging that we talked about. So being very conscious around how we are enabling or modeling this could be quite useful. So finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit around the idea of some of the elements of what it means to have a psychological safe environment. And before I get there, I do want to kind of provoke a little bit. And that is, which is that there's something that often happens in organizations, and certainly in my experience of organizations, is when I go and talk to people about how can we get more creative or innovative or bring new ideas into the room, they talk about the environment as being unsafe. And I'm wondering whether that's used as an avoidance tactic. I'm wondering whether what assumptions have been made around the lack of safety, whether it's something that they've experienced themselves or hearsay, gossip, a kind of something that happened to their great uncle in an organization that was not dissimilar to this one, that we're carrying in. And I do think that we have to challenge that. So a lot of what I would do is saying, what do you mean by unsafe? What has happened? What has happened to you? What do you think would happen if you spoke up? What is the worst thing that could happen? And most people say, I'll lose my job. And I'm saying, how many times have you seen that happen? Not often. Not that often. When have you seen it work? You reframe it. When have you seen it work in a different way that has been a little bit more creative and productive? Oh, well, So I think that we have to challenge this notion of people utilizing this as a way of stopping them from doing or being on the edge of their own incompetence. Not in a kind of brutal way, but certainly in a way that we can nudge people out of that space, because I think we often collude. So I'm going to speak from the I. I think I can collude with people when they say it's unsafe. I go, okay, let's see how we can make it safe enough. Rather than saying, so can you give me examples of? Now, there is a very, very blurred line. Very blurred, and we have to be very switched on to it. When it's unsafe, when it feels unsafe, but the purpose is for unlearning, I'm okay with that, actually. What I mean by that is that people might feel slightly shy to kind of make a mistake or humiliated when they don't. But if we can hold that with naming the fact that we're all learning together, that's okay. The blurred line is when it kind of switches over to the purpose of power over. Now, we've also seen that. The toxic cultures where people utilize their positions, or they undermine, or they provide unsolicited feedback in a way that is less useful. So can I tell you this about what I saw you do? Well, no, actually it's the wrong time, wrong place. And actually your purpose is to harm, not to help. So we need to understand intention. And so that's the blurred line. And one of the things that I think we have to do as leaders is to be able to do that diagnostic work, to be able to kind of get on the balcony and to understand what's going on and take the time, actually take time to understand who's doing what, how are they doing it, how are people responding? What is the tolerance for disruption across this? Now that takes time, but actually it's time well spent up front in establishing some of it, because that's where you start to build some of the trust that we talk about. You don't you're not given trust. You have to go in and sort of, there's a great article, again, I'll send it to you. It's called in order to trust, you've got to break it first, by a woman called Julie Diamond. And she talks about, actually, there is no thing where I can go, I trust you. I actually have to go in and see whether I can trust you. I have to be active in this. And a little bit like the safety trust dimension, we sometimes stop just before the edge. So that's one of the things. But if I go back to Amy Edmondson's work, because she simplifies this, and I don't think it's simple. She simplifies it. I don't think it's simple. It does require a whole lot of awareness, and I do believe that there are skills associated with this, skills that we can teach people, even if it's being more conscious of what's going on. And she talks about the way that we can get people to bring voices into a conversation, because she says voice is helpful. One is to frame all of our work as a learning process. So everything that we're doing is about learning. So we're all here to learn. No one has the answer. All voices are important. We need to get creative around this. It's never been done before. Your voice matters. So not speak up. Your voice actually matters is a very different way of saying it. Then speak up, kid, louder. Actually, we need you. We need you. We need it because I don't know how to do it. Because the second thing she talks about in terms of creating psychological safe environments is to acknowledge our own fallibility. So to role model that kind of sense that it's okay not to know. So a lot of the time when you're talking about kind of being creative or innovative, it's going, what am I missing? I can't, so actually showing people that you don't know it all and it's okay not to know it all. So what am I missing? What do you think? How are you seeing this problem that I kind of am looking at from a particular lens, and how is that different? So that's the second one. And the third one is she talks about modeling curiosity. And that is ask more questions than you do make statements. Because when you start to ask questions, what you are doing, inadvertently doing, is inviting people's voices in. What do you think? How would you do it? Is there a different way that we can do it? Now, it's a very simple but incredibly useful way of being able to facilitate the idea of people's voices coming in. Disagreement. We're allowed to disagree here because I'm going to disagree and I'm not going to wield power over. And I think that even just using those three, and whether it's large scale or smaller teams, thinking about this before we kind of rush into any project, rush into any process, may enable us to be much more deliberate around the environment that's required. So if I'm thinking about it at the end of the day, the Unterstützung, as my grandmother would say, we talk about trust. Actually, we have to model what that might look like. And those three simple kind of ways of fallibility, questioning, and the idea around this is learning, probably are the most useful things that I've stumbled upon. And at that point, I'm going to keep quiet and I'm going to open this up for argument.